Since 1985, the Wisconsin Conservation Hall of Fame has recognized and encouraged a conservation ethic in the state of Wisconsin. Tonight, that mission continues with the celebration of our 2024 induction class. I'm Marco Machetti. I'm the current 2024 board president of the Wisconsin Conservation Hall of Fame. On behalf of our entire board of directors, it's my honor to welcome you all to this special induction ceremony honoring Walt Bresette as the newest inductee to the Wisconsin Conservation Hall of Fame. Tonight, we'll have a chance to learn about Walt's life and legacy, and we'll hear from some of the people who knew Walt best. Thank you for being here. It's an honor to have you, and I hope you enjoy this truly special evening in the history of our great state of Wisconsin.
The Wisconsin Conservation Hall of Fame Foundation was created in 1984 to encourage the growth and practice of a conservation ethic as a legacy for the people of Wisconsin. The Wisconsin Conservation Hall of Fame is a nonprofit organization guided by a board of directors. Voting member organizations represent more than 30 conservation organizations from around Wisconsin. Each year, the Wisconsin Conservation Hall of Fame inducts up to 3 people into the Hall of Fame. To date, there are over 100 inductees who have been honored. You can learn about each of these conservation champions on the Wisconsin Conservation Hall of Fame website or by visiting the Hall of Fame Gallery. The Wisconsin Conservation Hall of Fame Gallery of Inductees is located in beautiful Schmeeckley Reserve, which is a natural area on the campus of the University of Wisconsin-Stevens Point, with 5 miles of nature trails and wildlife viewing opportunities. Inside the Schmeeckley Reserve Visitor Center, guests can view engraved wooden plaques about inductees, with quotes highlighting their contributions. A touchscreen computer gives visitors a chance to connect with Wisconsin's conservation heritage as they browse the stories and learn about the achievements of each inductee. Any person or organization can nominate someone for induction into the Wisconsin Conservation Hall of Fame. Nominees have an array of environmental and conservation-related backgrounds and varying types of education and experience. From writers to artists, from educators to policymakers, from researchers to managers, Wisconsin Conservation Hall of Fame heroes come from all backgrounds and walks of life. Based on standards and criteria set by the Wisconsin Conservation Hall of Fame Board of Directors, all inductees must have significant ties to Wisconsin, and their contributions must have wide-reaching impact, affecting a range of natural resources. Each summer, a 5-member Board of Governors reviews nominations. The highly esteemed governors are an independent body and have in-depth knowledge of Wisconsin's conservation history. The governors select 5 nominations to forward to the Board of Directors and voting member organizations for their consideration. The board members and organization representatives select the following year's inductees from that list of finalists at their annual fall meeting. While voting membership in the Wisconsin Conservation Hall of Fame is only open to organizational members of the foundation, individuals may participate in the mission by providing annual support as affiliate members. The financial support of member organizations and affiliate members allows the Wisconsin Conservation Hall of Fame to celebrate, advance, and share Wisconsin's conservation legacy as it hosts induction ceremonies and maintains inductee archives. We invite you to learn more about the Wisconsin Conservation Hall of Fame and Wisconsin's conservation heritage by visiting our website at wchf.org.
Thank you to these generous sponsors for making our 2024 induction ceremony possible. At the gold level, Richard Hemp. At the silver level, Culver's Corporation and Louis A. Posicani. At the bronze level, Todd Ames, Kathleen Falk, Wisconsin chapter of the Wildlife Society and the Wisconsin Wildlife Federation. At the supporter level, Sharon Gaskill, Jerry and Marilyn Knuth, Thrivent Choice contributors, Tom and Darlene Dunbar, Peter McKeever, Marco Machete, Paul DeLong, and Robert Roden, and in-kind sponsors, the University of Wisconsin-Stevens Point, for their help and technical support. Thanks again to these wonderful sponsors for helping make this ceremony possible. Our next speaker is Patty Lowe, Professor Emerita at the Medill School of Journalism at Northwestern University. Professor Lowe is the inaugural director for NU's Center for Native American and Indigenous Research. She's authored 4 books, and she's produced several documentaries that have appeared on both commercial and public television. Professor Lowe will share some striking stories about Walt's experience in activism and his leadership surrounding natural resource conservation and other social issues.
Bonjour, I'm Patty Lowe. I'm Bad River Ojibwe, and I am so thrilled that Walt Bresette will be inducted into the Wisconsin Conservation Hall of Fame. I remember meeting Walt in probably 1988, 89 maybe. It was, of course, during the Ojibwe spearfishing struggle, and Walt had been invited to speak at the Quakers Meeting House in Madison. And as a journalist, I'd been covering treaty rights and was feeling really just so disappointed that, the people, the men and women who are supposed to speak for us in our Native American communities are not used to speaking in 10-second television sound bites. I mean, it can be minutes, maybe even hours to explain something really important and meaningful. And so, quite frankly, we were getting clobbered in the mainstream media. The public relations machine of the state of Wisconsin and the anti-Indian groups were running pretty smoothly, and ours weren't. And I heard Walt speak at that meeting house, and he was so articulate. He was funny and witty and super smart and wise, and he connected so well with the audience. And I remember, as a journalist, I'm supposed to keep my thoughts to myself, but I had to go outside, and I remember being so overwhelmed, and I had myself a good cry before I came back. I was so grateful that the Ojibwe had somebody who was speaking to the environmental ethics of our people. The other story I wanted to share about Walt really wasn't about conservation, but I think it really speaks to who he was as an individual. It was in the early 1990s, and the Ku Klux Klan had announced that they were going to do a recruiting event in Ironwood, Michigan, of all places. And the good people of Ironwood and the mayor and council people at the time were just horrified, mortified that the KKK was going to stage a march in their community. And so a lot of people were up in arms, and Walt calmed them down and organized a peace vigil away from the march and convinced all the people who decided that they were going to confront the KKK along the parade route to, when the KKK marched by, they would simply turn their backs and not acknowledge them. But more brilliantly, he and the mayor got together, and Walt convinced her to open up the fire hydrants in back of the KKK marchers and talk to the faith people in the city who got out their church members with scrub brushes and soap and brooms and mops. And as the KKK marched past them, the fire hydrants were opened, and all the good people of Ironwood got out there and scrubbed away the hate from the streets. It was, even now I get goosebumps just thinking about it, and it so epitomized Walt, the way he really understood political theater, for one thing, but was able to talk to people and reach common ground and act in ways that showed our humanity and our integrity and the kind of people we wanted to be. So I couldn't be prouder that Walt Bresette is inducted into the Wisconsin Conservation Hall of Fame. Getting a little emotional, so I think I'll just sign off and and thank everybody who had a part in getting him inducted. Miigwech,
Our next speaker is Wisconsin Assembly District 71 Representative Katrina Shanklin, who will share a legislative citation honoring Walt's induction into the Wisconsin Conservation Hall of Fame. Representative Shanklin, thanks for being here this evening.
A citation of commendation from the state of Wisconsin. Know you by these presents. Whereas Walter Bresette grew up on the Red Cliff Reservation of Lake Superior, Ojibwe, where he developed an appreciation for the outdoors and a deep commitment to protecting Wisconsin's natural resources for future generations. And whereas, in 1965, Walter attended a summer camp for Indigenous youth at the University of Wisconsin-Eau Claire, sparking an interest in environmental and social justice advocacy that would last a lifetime. And whereas, after serving his country overseas for 4 years as a communications specialist in the U.S. Army, Walter attended art school in Chicago, studied Indian issue advocacy at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and became editor of the Great Lakes Indian Fish Commission newsletter. And whereas, Walter rose to prominence in the late 1980s, successfully organizing and mobilizing support for the right of the Ojibwe to spearfish in waters outside of their reservation, enduring severe racism and organized groups of protesters. And whereas, demonstrating the utmost patience, compassion, and courage, Walter inspired others with his selfless acts of peaceful protest and nonviolent opposition. From stopping trains from carrying sulfuric acid to Michigan's White Pine Mine by leading the successful tribal blockade of the railroad tracks across the Bad River Reservation to supporting the Mole Lake Sokogon Chippewa community against the proposed Crandon Mine, which threatened wild rice beds and the Wolf River trout fishery. And whereas, throughout the 1990s, Walter's activism shifted towards defending Wisconsin's lakes and rivers from reckless corporate polluters, championing Prove It First legislation that would require all metallic sulfide mining companies to prove they had not contaminated ground or surface water in any of their previous mines before being allowed to mine in Wisconsin. And whereas, because of Walter's steadfast advocacy and dedication to protecting water quality in Wisconsin, the Wisconsin State Legislature passed Prove It First legislation, and Governor Tommy Thompson signed the bill into law on Earth Day in 1998. And whereas, Walter will always be remembered as a visionary and gifted storyteller by the Wisconsin conservation community, and his legacy as co-founder of the Midwest Treaty Network will continue to build bridges between Native and non-Native communities for generations to come. Now, therefore, the members of the Wisconsin State Legislature, on the motion of Representative Katrina Shanklin, do hereby honor Walter Bresette for his outstanding service and commitment to conservation, and thank him for his inspiring leadership and dedication to environmental stewardship, which have left an enduring legacy in Wisconsin.
To celebrate the formal induction of Walt Bresette into the Wisconsin Conservation Hall of Fame, we welcome Walt's daughter, Katie, coming to us live from Red Cliff, Wisconsin. Katie, welcome.
Bonjour, Gakanawia. Nutamising kiwi me gocho in and bebesent the make oma no. Kiwi wind the moon in bangi tago in the man. Be shinning in daga megwa gagitoya no. Bangi tago in da uchipwem. Giabi in under gikindan me own schnabby, not as even. Niba we are ingik no ma moma ayayan get a key menoning. In the way maganag, in inewag, kaiwag, metaguak, arisiak, manituak, a sema, sinik, a kinawia nagego a magid a kimenan. Anand, ingi wind the magum, anand, ingi widu kagum, a kina ingi shawena migum. Nitamising, give me go to in him, a kina gakanawina menakuk. In the day banangi wind the mag meja. Api gi kazansu yan. Gida me queen a mag a kina and schnabe panigo. Gida me queen danan in yon schnabe she twawen. Gida and schnabe nadis. A panigo a sema ken. Gikido api nagishka goyan. Win the mountain tam gidu dem. Econising. Doesn't dan range bayan. Econising. Gida win the mag. Negishkagut. Gidin away maganag. Ishkaj. Giga win the mawak. Ishin a kazuyan. Misa away gigakane and megoyan. Anuj gagain damoin. Ingimina ginde deban. Me the show gamadak. Gamada kamagok. Ishka majatad and de deban. Ingio da pena ni bogegu gabe. Ogi widu kaguan bata yinuan. Okina o gagain da suin. Gigi kendang makushaban. Yinua gigiu da penawan gaye. Migo nasa bagijigan. Makunsaban ogi panenan e oga kendamo in a ma. Misso emagak gi majat. Gonna budge. Gawi nawi ana kanu tanzina kanagego gagi kadoya no manungo. Migizi ngi win the mag manager. Gawi meme tinga ana kanu tanzina wan wajabam wen. Anuja go we ogi nesado toan go na we no kidoenan. Nungom dash going gaya beginu and genisro tanzina wan no or jabam and pegish waiba gino agakina. Giwio jabwe motade men geabe minwa. Giwi win the moon and name dash ga kido da on and be there ban kishitai and nishaganashim bangi. Mangi do dem Miss Kabi Kang and Dunjba. Makun Saban and Baba Ban Schnabi in the Kazaban. Ninsa Ziganikazans and Dishnikas. Inga McQueen down now on a new Jogo Wia. Miss Awinawa. Gape Jawa Nungu, Gayawa Goma, Mezawake Gaye. Was a Nibu Awia that doesn't the mark baby cockina. Gawin dash Gayabi Ninsa and God doesn't masi. Gishpin in the man, Kikan Ganuja, the Jin the man or Ganabad Guayak. Inga McQueen of Magna Tamis English, Nini Janasak. Na nagashabase makwa bidun sa cash na awawa tesi kwe na meme kwe mewa all manumanikeshi kaye nga me kwe na ma on and nabem gidabijuj na kazo au gige dashin ka me kwe na ma o na shime me au zao maingan ni jina kazo ge dashin ga dajama o ne me say ban me o jashko benesika ban jina kazo au ge mago o mangi kwe Ni bo da shubia gabi ayaw kuma nga makwena ma mashko gabo me no so anakwit me wa o no so gabo kwe gabi kikino ma nag ano chako via the queen wena me go giwi me gwitche wena me go giwi a panego giwi wina munanim ge kedaya man no gom so I'm starting to lose my Ojibwe now, and that's usually a good sign for me to stop speaking Ojibwe and kind of pull it back. I want to thank everyone really first and foremost for kind of taking the time to spend the end of what I'm sure has been a very long, hard day in the midst of long, hard weeks, long, hard seasons, years, and perhaps even lifetimes. It's hard not to be tired right now. But one thing I hope especially is that hope itself is starting to burn a little bit more brightly for all of us. I want to acknowledge a spark of hope for my community here, specifically today. To the Red Cliff community, the Bayfield School Board, the assistance of our language leaders and warriors, for our littlest babies, our oldest elders, and everyone in between and those yet here to come, I want to say congratulations, love, and honor. We just found out yesterday that we'll be opening our first ever Ojibwe immersion kindergarten classroom here in our community. This work has been over 100 years in the making since our first children were taken and our communities were initially divided. It may be a small start for some, but in a community like ours, it's a huge leap after many hundreds of miles trudging to this moment. I'm so proud and honored to call you all my family. I wrote all of this down because I promised my sister that I'd come here prepared. I'm actually not really that good at writing. Instead of editing, I usually just rewrite everything. Instead of fluidity, I agonize over the permanency of text. Speaking is like breathing, and speaking in as an Ojibwe is what carries forth all of our lives. We were orators, we were speakers, we took time and we made time. That is no longer how we live as we try to adjust still to a world that is being designed in spite of our truths. I'm not going to pretend to translate what I just previously said. I will provide my best understanding as to what I'm trying to say with the words that I have now, but it's difficult. These words specifically were not invented. All of our words really were not invented to be zoomed or timed, right? The way I was taught, we were given these words to create the connections that reflect the relationships that carry our responsibilities. All those responsibilities, the ones to ourselves, to each other, and to the gifts the world has given us. Those responsibilities we are charged with carrying forward each day. One thing everyone really should understand is a lesson from my father, and the lesson that he did his best to leave. It was a good man who learned from Walt, and I'm sure many other ones of our leaders, who was here to teach me this lesson long after my dad had left us. That may be the point of this whole story I'm spinning tonight, so please be patient and listen carefully if you can. This good man, who is still here doing good work and remembered good things about the man who Walter was, he taught me that a long time ago, this translation for you was not necessary. He taught me that regardless of your affiliations, your delegations, or your mother tongue, my introduction would have been understood. And we could be moving along the business right about now. But that's not how it is anymore. I have these clunky words to fit into your precious time. Time that has been etched and carved and stolen from you from the moment you were placed on this earth. English, education, jobs, schedules. None of these were tools that were left for you to build up your relationships. They were left here to divide, to destroy, to extract from you and your life here on this earth. To carry on your responsibilities, you must remember your original instructions. And for some, those seem to have been lost. I can give you a general understanding of who I am, my instructions, my teachings, my gifts. I can translate to you all some of what I was told, but the words I will use now can never convey the truly inherent rights my father, good men, good women, the money Dugan our teachings have left for me and my folk to inherit. Your words were not designed to describe my world. I do not say that in shame, nor do I expect shame to be what you feel. It is not our faults that we all inherited this world. However, it will be our responsibility to decide what it is we will carry forward, what thread we grab and string along. I will never be able to tell you what it is you will do, but the one lesson, the one story, the thread of responsibility that Walter left for me, he left me this body, this soul. We're here to celebrate a man who left us each a piece of that story. And tonight, I have the pure honor to give you and share you mine. In sharing what he left for me, I want to encourage you all to see what he left us each, what we each inherited, how we can contribute in continuing to carry this work on each day. My dad taught me many, many things. I was his little girl, and as much as he did for the world, my parents too did and worked so hard to make sure that we were there. We had the same schooling requirements as you all, but we went to a tiny little Catholic school that was better for my big sister. They taught her to read in a way that other people couldn't. But they also allowed us to explore, to go to lectures, to be at court cases, to go to the universities and the communities when we needed to, and to understand that that was as important to this education as anything else. That alone allowed a pair of pretty brilliant humans to raise 3 little monkeys in a setting that even you all may not have known was happening at the time. My foundational teaching, the one thing Walter really did leave me, was the importance of our words. As a little girl, as a young woman, I began to learn what Loon Clan really means. He did his best to describe the fractured existence that Ojibwe people had been left at that moment. He taught me that those words will mean everything. You can never take back words you might say, he said. And so those words must always be used as the tools that they are, that we must be intentional and careful and thoughtful before we speak. We have a story that tells us that Creator gave us these words to use in our lives, to learn and understand creation and our place, to be able to hear when our grandfathers speak and when the waters whisper and when the trees teach, to be able to carry our first teachings. There were so many people whose lives were touched by this man we all called Walt. It was his words, his medicine, his minerals, his blood that came out when he spoke. As I begun to understand what those words really meant, it's our clan teachings that told me that truth. The Loon clan might be a bit loony, right? Just think of one old shenanigan that old guy used to do and all these old troublemakers here. You guys know what that really means. But despite of how fun all of us Loon clan members might be, it's those voices that can be heard across the nation. In all of the instructions, our folks were left each thread that the ones before us left for each of us to pick up and sew. There are truths, lessons, teachings, words. I can only share mine, but I'm hoping to do that for just a moment tonight. His words, his presence, his threads, they were so memorable. As a kid, it just seemed to be all of our reality. So much so that as an adult, I didn't actually realize that everyone wasn't as omnipresent as Walt. Not everybody went to all the reservations, sat on stages, learned how to ride their bikes in between the crowds of Northland students who were there just to hear his words. As a little kid, it was a common experience to be asked by all of the adults, where are you supposed to be? And the easiest way to continue whatever mission we were on was to say, it's fine, we're Walt's kids. We just really didn't have to say anything much after that. As an adult, the same still really holds true for me. I go to communities, I've worked in language, I've been to university, I've been to Congress. And in each of those halls, on each of those missions, in each home, when I've been asked, who are you? The answer I'm so fortunate to be able to give is, I'm one of Walt's kids. The fact of the matter, though, is at that time, I think we all were. That's a difference in our communities, in our world, in our teachings, and in our responsibilities. As Anishinaabe, we still remember that we belong to each other, this land, and the ones who haven't yet come. I had to explain to my husband just yesterday that as much of the assimilationist world that had tried to take me, I may have actually been raised as an Ojibwe, a feat that my grandmothers and aunties could only have dreamt of, a feat we're still fighting to regain and maintain, even still to this day. We no longer have Walter's words to hear each day that we're here. Even when we think we remember, it's often we just have our interpretations of his thoughts. He had worked, I had heard, that winter before he died. He worked all season on stories for children, ideas for a world he wanted his grandchildren to know. He wanted to leave something for us all, for Walt's kids. I'm going to share my last moments, and they're sad, but they are important. So please bear with me just one more time. I didn't write this part down, and this is just a memory. It's a memory I kept for myself for a long time because I didn't want to hurt anyone else, and I didn't want to hurt you. My dad asked me to leave my own home when I was 12. He probably had every right to. I was probably a pain in the ass, to be honest. I remember my mom always tells a story. You know, it was really hilarious because your dad just called and said, Catherine, come get your daughter. I'm always her daughter when the trouble started. But I guess I was probably his daughter when I was causing her a ruckus too. I didn't get to go home that next summer during those breaks. And I know he did it to protect me. He wanted to keep me from a place that he thought could maybe I could get into trouble or cause trouble. Maybe he understood that in the turmoil and in the places that I lived, there was more happening around me than I really understood. And so I didn't actually get to come home for quite a few years, probably 2 years, almost. And when he, the last time that I actually really got to spend time with him, my mom got to finally take a cool trip, got to go to Ireland and spend some time to herself. And she called him up and said, "Hey, come watch your kids, damn it." And so he came down and he hung out with a pain in the butt 13-year-old, his sweet little son, and his well-behaved daughter. That was not me. I was not that one. That was you, Claudia. And as he came and visited with us and helped us, he did his "I'm a dad now" sort of thing. But I don't know if y'all ever had Walter for a dad. It involves a lot of hippies, a lot of conferences, lots of writing, a little bit of NPR. Okay, I'm just getting all the NPR. And in those moments, I we just went to school. We just hung out with our friends. We got to spend probably about 2.5 really good weeks with him. He even came to my middle school and he lectured for, I don't know, all 700 kids that were there down in Madison. And it was really interesting because before he showed up, I was just Katie, right? But then he came and holy smokes, man, your dad's cool. He cussed in front of all the 12-year-olds. That's why he was that cool. Yeah, I know, it was great. And we got to be able to be next to each other in a way that we hadn't been for a long time. And being the pain in the ass that I was out one night way too late, came in and covered in inappropriate markings, probably smelled like cigarettes and other things. And definitely it was just being 13 and annoying. And I was pretty good at being able to sneak in, go downstairs. Nobody really cared. Nobody really wanted to deal with me. 13 is a great time to be ignored. And he didn't ignore me that time. He didn't sit there and pretend I wasn't there. He came downstairs and he looked at me and he saw me. He saw me marked up. He smelled me. He saw my eyes. And he knew I wasn't there. I wasn't there. And he started to really kind of lecture me. And he was like, "Who do you think you are? You're 13. You can't do this. You can't be this person." And I told him, I was like, "Who the hell do you think you are, Walter? You've been so busy raising everyone else on creation, taking care of everyone else who is here. Who do you think you are telling me how I should be? If Catherine's okay with it, then you should be okay with it." He was like, "You think your mother's okay with this behavior?" I was like, "She don't need to know. She's in Ireland, right?" "Yeah, 13. We went back and forth for a little bit and I could see him getting mad. I could see him really agitating. And I finally I yelled. And I didn't yell at my parents. I wasn't raised that way. And instead of yelling back, he kind of deflated. And I'd never seen him deflate. I'd never seen him beaten. I'd never seen him sad. And he looked at me and he told me, he said, "Katie, you were right. You're right. You were right. I wasn't here. I have no right to tell you who you should be. I didn't take care of you. I was too busy." And I realized that. And I told them. And I was a little shocked. I was a little lost for a moment because I couldn't understand who he had told. I didn't realize this until just a couple of years ago, but he had been at one of his last lectures over at Tree Haven. And when he was at that lecture, he was telling everyone, he said, "You know what? I think I'm done with you all. It's time for me to start getting ready. One day I have to be a grandfather." So he explained some of those things to me. And as a 13-year-old, I was still confused, not thinking straight, so pretty angry, probably not quite sober. And I didn't really understand what he meant. And instead of trying to explain or overdo anything, he just sat me down and he goes, "Baby, do you want your bedtime story?" What a lot of people don't know is he wrote me a story a long time ago. And in that story, it was the one he told us two stories, my sister's birth and then my story. Every time, whether we were sick or tired, or if he just got home from the road, if he was hurting, he told us our stories. And as a 13-year-old, feeling like a 20-year-old and a 2-year-old all at once, I just cried and said, yes, please. Yes, please, Daddy. He laid me down. He told me my story. And the next morning, he asked me to bring my little friend who I was out partying with that night. He said, bring that little white girl here. Come on. We got to do pipe. I was like, Daddy, you can't just do pipes with everybody. It's just a little white girl. She didn't know what you're going to do. And he said, no, it's okay. Come on. Because if you're this sad about your daddy, then she's probably this sad about her daddy too. Because no little girl isn't sad about her daddy and do these things. And so I brought my friend and we sat there together. And my daddy put that pipe out. And he promised. He promised us that he was done. He promised us that he wasn't going to continue the work that he had done all those 10 years. He promised us that it was time for us now and that we were the ones he had to put into. He promised us he was going to be ready to be a grandfather. And he had to leave. I think it was the next day or the day after. It was a very peaceful end of the visit. He promised to convince my mom that I could come home. Not that she needed convincing. She probably wanted to get rid of me too. He promised that we could come home in a couple weeks as soon as spring break came. He promised we could come home for summer and winter. And we started talking about maybe letting me come home to live. That's all I ever wanted. I just wanted to be home. And when that happened, he hugged me and he just held me. And he's like, I love you, my girl. And I got the phone call 2 weeks later. My Uncle Randy had to call. He said, baby, I'm so sorry, but he's gone. 4 minutes, it said. He was down on 4th in Duluth, blocks away from the hospital. And then that ambulance was called. He was gone before they even got there. He was done. He was done with everyone at that point in time. But the thing that nobody really knows is that he always kept that promise to me. Never once have I ever had to want or ask for anything. Whenever I needed something, even in spite and anger, I could put this tobacco down and he was there. Within 24 hours of anything I needed, there it was, right there, every time. I couldn't even pretend that I couldn't believe that I was Ojibwe, right? Because it was just there all the time. At 13, driving home, stopping to buy a black dress to bury the only man who was supposed to make sure that I'd make it okay. The man who had promised that he'd be home now, that he would make it better, that he would hold me close. That day I arrived in my driveway, walked up my stairs, entered my home, never to see that man again. I remember that night vaguely, slowly, with care. My two best friends, the two girls who held me closest through all of the days before and after, the ones who remembered how Walt could yell at you in whispers, but only in his tidy whities, late at night while little girls whispered by the fire. They were there. I remember that. I can't see their faces, but on each side of me, straight up to my room, where we cried, we smoked cigarettes, we laughed, and for no goddamn reason other than that, we remembered my dad's old ADHD brain left stashes of random tape rolls all over the house. Never finished, always lost. Friggin' tape rolls, you guys, everywhere. We found every last one and used them all up. We defied gravity and we taped me to a door. That's what I remember the day my dad died. What I didn't see, what they all protected me from, were the takers, the worshipers, the extractors, who managed to mine my father's soul. It wasn't on purpose. Just like us, it wasn't their fault that they'd been born on this earth of extraction and of greed. They saw what they wanted and they took as they pleased. That man spent his life protecting your water, your lands, your children. What my 13-year-old brain didn't know or understand, what my two best friends guarded me from, what my mother and his real best friends did that night to protect me from a group of my dad's friends. Folks who knew that he was more than just a body, but a soul and a memory of fight and of fire. They tried to move into my uncle's home, take over the entire place, tried to declare a war in my father's name. I did it for my best friend, one said about my father. But my father's two best friends were holding Walter's children, ignoring that they were probably smoking more than just cigarettes and laughing at her as she swung from a door. My father's best friends were holding back my mother's fury so that she didn't kill the ones who took her children's lives. My father's best friends were addressing what to do to protect Walt's kids, those who took his work, his writings, the things he wanted his children to know. They were no more his friends than any robber baron is to this land. It was in that loss that I wandered for far too many years. It was a long and arduous and necessary journey that's only done when I'm done here, I suppose. But I wandered and I wondered, a question I couldn't form until recently. What if we're just the next ones? What if we accepted our real places? What if it wasn't about heroes and worship? What if it wasn't one man and one loss? What if this loss was for us? What if this loss was for me? What does real loss teach you and show you, help you to understand? It doesn't justify our wrongdoings, the trauma we cause, the bad things that we've done. But my uncle just told me weeks ago, we just forgave each other, my girl. You can't keep walking with the past still dragging behind you. It's like you keep wearing your own shitty diaper. It's shaped. You don't wear shit, Katie. My loss as a daughter, as a child, as a singular human has never been only my loss. And what he left me and what he left us, it might only have been my story, but I may be the luckiest person in this world. In my loss, in my story, in what was left for me. Because it was our loss, it was our story, and it was what was left for us. Never once did I have to grieve alone for a soul that, like all the others here and gone and yet to come, deserved to be its most bright and shining blink in the breath of this world. Never once will I suffer silently or singularly. For when that North Star, mi wa makus, gageshabase gomagidakimananik, that bear who walked this place in his time, it was us who got to have him. I am blessed to have shared my whole life with a world who still to this day fights on. As a young one, and as I got big, I've been searching for scraps, hopes, one last memory or meaning, forgetting that he never left it all just for me. That it was you, you who cared, you who tried, you who had moments and changed. A Dene woman who had to have been my age when she met him, just long enough to come back 30 years later to leave her own corn pollen for his lake, her seeds for his grandchildren. To close tonight, I'm going to give you all one last gift. I'm going to give you all my story. What no one knows, well, probably few still do, is that my name is not Zigunikwe. Many people still call me that. But my name is Zigunikwe Sans, the little spring girl. I was just his little girl when he left this small place. But little girls will change the world along with their sisters, with their mothers, with their brothers and their uncles, with their grandfathers and their mothers, and every dear piece of one of you who held him all so close that you were able to give him to me, piece by piece. I'm the luckiest Ojibwe woman to have ever lost her father because I've always had all of you. I am sorry if I've ever hurt any of you in my grief, in my pain, in the loss of such a man. So I'll give you the only comfort I've ever needed. I'm going to read you my bedtime story. He told this story to me since I was born, and it's the last story he ever told me. On one of the last nights I ever saw him, instead of chastising and hurting a little girl back, he pulled me into his arms and he just asked me, honey, do you want your story? It was the only thing I needed that night, and he just knew. So now, as our world is burning, as we sugar in January, and the ice won't come back, and we don't know what's going to come next, we're all just little ones, and we're scared, and it's unknown, and we're all trying our best to do without the ones who are supposed to tell us how we're supposed to be here. In this moment, I'm going to give you all the only thing I've ever known to be true. Remember Walter, not as a prophet, not as a hero. Remember him just as he was a man who was supposed to be someone's grandfather. It's one thing to light a fire, and it's a whole other thing to keep these flames alive. I love you all so much. And now, his story. When I was looking for all of this work, I found this book. It's Sustaining the Forest and the People and the Spirit. It was a short story. I never realized he wrote this down. I didn't find it until about 15 years ago. And I found it again about 10 years ago. So this is my story, Zigoniquizans, the spring girl. The young girl was named after the spring, the season of her birth. Like the spring, some have said that she too would melt the cold in our hearts and bring new buds of nature's beauty. She was called Zigoniquizans, which means spring girl. Zigon, her grandfather would call, come, it's time to start getting ready for winter. She called her grandfather, Shumas. The birds tell me it's going to be a short but very harsh winter. They say it will start early, lots of snow and cold. But then an early spring will relieve us of our burdens, he told her. They lived together in a small lodge on the edge of the village, which was located on the shores of Gitchikomink. Mishomis was once a widely respected elder in the many villages and camps which dotted the shores of Gitchikomink. He told her that he was gifted in his early life, back when many more older traditions were still observed by the people. As they prepared for winter, he once more spoke of the old ways. You must never forget what I've told you, my girl, he cautioned in a wistful tone. So many have already just given up. They'll never survive a challenging winter. The hunting grounds had been lost in treaties, and everyone now had to live permanently on these new things called Indian reservations. He constantly complained that they were too cramped, not enough game or fish, and all the medicine and special places were off the reservation in the old hunting grounds. Though he and a few of the old ones tried to keep the old hunting grounds, the younger leaders wouldn't listen, nor would they fight for their lands. They signed the paper treaty quickly after being promised to the government agents they would be taken care of. Mishomis thought he knew better, but was ignored. We must take care of ourselves, they'd say. They've penned us up like little zoo animals, and like those poor creatures, we too will lose our spirit. Most of our people are already lost. Unless we remember someday, we will be so pitiful, we will only be good to look at. In this village near Gatikamink, he and Nauzikwan were the only ones who seemed to care about the older ways. Since the death of her parents, they spent much time together. The rest of the villagers thought them a strange pair. Her parents and her grandmother died when a new illness swept over the reservation. They were among many who died. Others survived, but were more frail than before the strange disease. To Mishomis, it seemed also to affect how the survivors thought. Mishomis tried to save the village, but like the others, he tried to tell them the people wouldn't listen. He knew of a special medicine, but the new village leaders were afraid to collect it, fearful it would upset the government agents. This medicine was off the reservation in the old hunting grounds. Despite his sadness, Mishomis still tried to teach Zikon to do the right things. And even though he was no longer respected in his village, he knew that the people still needed him. Along with his granddaughter, he settled into reservation life. Come, my girl, he would say each morning. Let's go see which of the old ones needs water or wood. Oh, and don't forget that extra food from last night's supper. We'll see who might be hungry. That's the way this strange couple lived in this new village of an old people. They tried to carry on old traditions in a new way, clinging to old ways under new circumstances. One day, after the chores for the lodge were done, Ziegwan asked her grandfather what else should be done about the upcoming harsh winter. She noticed that few of the people in the village were ready for winter, even a mild one. Mishumis, she began, if the people don't get ready for winter, won't they have a hard time? Shouldn't you do something? Maybe talk to the village chief so that everyone knows that hard times are coming? What a good idea, he answered, very proud of her for concern for her others. I'll go tonight after you're asleep and I will talk with the chief and his council. So hurry, we must prepare gifts to bring. Together they made bundles of sage and cedar tea. Before he left, they went for a walk down by the river which flowed into Getchikomink. She noticed he was looking sad. If anything ever happens to me, my girl, he began, I want you to come every new moon to this river and burn some sage. On this river, I will always be with you. Oh, Miss, she said, surprised. Nothing could ever happen to you. You're too wise. And I'll always be with you, so nothing can happen. Now don't talk that way. Well, just remember all the teachings we've talked about, and everything will always be good, he said, trying to reassure her. I love you, he said finally. It's time for me to go to the council. Come, it's time for you to go to bed. Ziegwan, not ready for bed while Michonne was prepared for the meeting, he still looked sad, so she smiled a big smile to make him happy. I love you, she said, and then he was gone. She was tired from the long day and quickly drifted off to sleep. As she began her dreams, the fall sun was setting over the wooded landscape. Mishomis, after passing around the gifts, spoke first. He told the council of his concern for the village. No one seems ready for the harsh winter that's coming, he said. Harsh winter, interrupted the chief. Who told you it's going to be a harsh winter? It's still early fall, and the government agent said it'll be a mild winter. And he promised us more supplies before the freezing moon. Haven't you noticed the birds? Mishomis asked. They're the ones who predict winter, not government agents. From what they told me, your government supplies will never make it here. By the heavy snows of November, it will be too late. Haven't you noticed? Oh, birds, they all yelled at once, then began laughing at the old man. He tried to explain the signs and what they meant, but they would not let him continue. Why, you're just an old, stupid fool, said the chief. Forget those old ways, they're gone. By reminding the people, you're only causing trouble. You must stop this babble or things will change, especially for you. I cannot change what is real, Ms. Shomas said defiantly. If you won't do something to warn the people, then I must. As Ms. Shomas was about to leave, the chief called some warriors to his lodge. Take this old man away. See to it he makes no more trouble. When she awoke, the frost told Ziegwan that Ms. Shomas and the birds were right. Winter was just around the corner. It seemed especially cold in their lodge. She wondered why Ms. Shomas had not yet put new wood on the hot embers. Ms. Shomas, she called, Ms. Shomas, I'm cold and I'm hungry. When her grandfather didn't come, she got up to look for him. She thought maybe he went for a walk down by the river as he often did. I'll make him some tea, she thought. He'll be chilled when he gets back, and he'll like some hot tea. She got some kindling, blew on the embers, raised a small fire, and waited. When he didn't return, even after the sun was above the trees, she started to worry. She ran through the village, asking if anyone had seen her grandfather. People said no, leave them alone. When he hadn't yet returned by noon, she was sure something had happened to him. She decided she must talk to the chief. Well, hello, Ziegwan, the chief greeted her pleasantly. How are you today? She was taken by surprise. He was never pleasant, especially to her. I'm not well. Miss Shomas is missing and I'm very worried, she told him. I'm afraid something terrible has happened to him. Oh, don't worry, the chief said. He'll be back. After our meetings last night, he said he had to go on a secret mission. He said something about medicine down at the far southern village. Ziegwan didn't know what to think. Nothing was making sense. Could it be true? She was afraid of the chief, and Mashoma said he couldn't be trusted, but he was the village leader. Would he lie? But he would never leave without me, she blurted out, beginning to cry. He would have taken me with him. He would have at least told me. He said something about a vision he'd had down by the river, the chief responded. He said he needed to go immediately and that he'd return on the full moon. But it was a full moon last night, she cried. That means he won't be back for a long time. Are you sure that's what he said? Of course, Ziguan. No, don't worry, the chief said, now more sternly. And he said you should stay and help old Lady Otter while he was gone. Not knowing what to do or say or even think, Ziguan went back to her lodge. She fell onto her bed, sobbing. Soon she fell asleep and started dreaming. She thought she saw her grandfather. He seemed hurt, but was being helped by someone or something. Then she saw him again. They were in their lodge. He was telling her stories again, reminding her to help others and not to worry about him. She was awakened by some warriors, still very worried and crying. She was told that she must leave the lodge immediately. They said that old Lady Otter was cold and hungry, needed her help right now. That night, the first of many heavy snows fell on the village. Old Lady Otter's lodge was cold and in disrepair. It seemed even older and creakier than the old lady herself. And like many other lodges, it was not ready for the winter. For the next month, Ziguan worked the hardest she could ever remember. When she'd worked with Mishomis, it was hard but fun. Now it was just hard. She cooked and cleaned every day. Her sadness for her grandfather was numbed by her tiredness. Every night she would fall into a restless sleep, only to be awakened by the cries of the sad old lady. Every morning she would have to get up first to warm the lodge and prepare the food. When Mishomis didn't return on the next full moon, she was sad but not surprised. She suspected the chief had lied, but there was nothing she could do. So she worked to keep alive and to keep the sadness away. But she did remember her grandfather's wish. And every full moon, she'd sneak away from the village and bring sage down by the river. After smudging herself, for a brief time, she would talk to Mishomis. She would first smile and then remember her sadness. The winter was the worst anyone could remember. With no one prepared, Ziguan worked all the harder. Every day after caring for old Lady Otter, she'd go to a different lodge to see who she could help. Though she was too tired to be too sad about the loss of Mishomis, she did remember his teachings. Helping others, even if they didn't appreciate it, helped her, and she always looked forward to talking with him on each new full moon. As the cold and the snow dragged on, even Ziguan was beginning to get depressed. There was so much sickness and hunger in the village. The early snows prevented the promised government supplies from reaching the village. In this darkness of spirit and winter, she planned an outing to get away for a day from the village. The weather broke and there were days of warm sunshine. After a week of this wonderful weather, she packed a lunch, told old Lady Otter she'd be elsewhere working, and slipped away toward the river. Ever since Mishomis told her to play at that river, she wondered about the river's source. She imagined other happier villages upriver. With the snow-covered ice underfoot was smooth but slippery road. On her outing, she decided to explore this icy road. The warm mornings soon turned almost hot. Too early for spring, she thought, but she ran and played up the river nonetheless. She traveled for hours, enjoying the scenery and just getting away from the village. By the look of the sun and the growling in her stomach, she knew it was about time for lunch. It was so warm, she took off her winter blanket and laid it on the edge of the river to sit. She once more began to feel happy. She ate her food and imagined the happy villages upriver. Suddenly, she heard a sound, an animal noise. Across the river, she spotted a small mound and noticed some movement. It looked like a wigwam in which she lived. Out on the top, she saw the small brown head of Muskrat. Muskrat, too, seemed to be tired of this hard winter. The warm sun brought him out of the hibernation. First, cautiously, he looked around. Ziguan sat absolutely still, not wanting to scare him. Soon, he was completely out and on top of this little wigwam. Suddenly, he let out a yelp. Whoosh! Down he went, slipping on the ice on his domed home. Embarrassed, he looked around to see if anyone had seen him. Then he chattered to himself, and Ziguan thought it was a chuckle. Ziguan too chuckled inside of herself. She sat for a long time watching Muskrat sliding down the side of his lodge. For hours he played this sliding game. She enjoyed watching him as much as he enjoyed the sliding. The warm sun felt so good. Small droplets of melting snow and ice could be heard near the bank. She laid back on her blanket. Quickly, she fell into a deep sleep. So relieved from being away from the village, so tired from such a hard winter, and still so lonely for her grandfather, she fell deeper and deeper into sleep. Ziguan slept into the evening. Despite the warmth, it was still winter. The sun set early in the deep woods, but on this day, not before it opened large areas of water on the river. When she finally began to stir, she didn't know if she was dreaming, awakening, or had dreamt the whole day. including the fun with the muskrat. All she knew that it was dark, and she was cold and very hungry. The rushing water added confusion to the darkness. She looked around and could not make out where she was. Up over a large ravine, she could see the first light of the moon. But before she could make a plan, she heard a new noise. Strange sound suddenly came from behind the river. It's not the sound of a muskrat. It was something much larger, and it was heading right for her. This is way cooler with my dad's voice. I just want everyone to know that. Frightened, she scrambled from the riverbank, gripping and tripping in the darkness. Even if she could get by the sound, she now figured that the river road had melted and was no escape. She tried to quietly sneak up the ravine. She screamed, now running straight up the ravine, tripping over brush, scraping her feet and legs and face. If only I can get to the top. In the moonlight, I can find a good place to hide or a shortcut back to the village, she thought. She was almost at the crest of the hill when she tripped and began rolling back towards that terrible sound. Down she went screaming, and suddenly she rolled against a tree which stopped her fall. Next to the tree was a dark hole. It was a cave. She quickly but quietly crawled inside. She went deep inside as far as she could crawl. Her heart was pumping so fast she thought it would be as loud as a drum. She was so afraid she tried not to breathe. When she reached the back of the cave, she turned and could see the opening against the cave's darkness. Suddenly, out of nowhere, the whole front of the cave was covered by a dark, hairy figure. She was sure it was a bear. As it entered the cave, she was also sure that she would be here no longer. Whoa! The bear said as it followed her scent to the rear of the cave. Closer and closer the bear came. The opening was completely covered and once more pitch black. As the bear came closer, she began to cry softly. She could almost feel that bear's breath. Just as the bear reached out to touch her, she saw a flash of light and felt something warm rush over her face. She closed her eyes and screamed. Sure, she had been bitten, but then quietly, she heard not a growl, but a voice, a familiar voice. Open your eyes, my girl. I have a friend I want you to meet, said the voice. Miss Shomas, she asked quietly. Miss Shomas, is it really you? Have I died and gone to that place beyond here? She was sure that nothing anymore made sense, awake or dreaming, dead or alive. Open your eyes, my girl, the voice said once more. You are not dead or dreaming. You're safely here with me. Slowly, she opened her eyes and saw the biggest, blackest bear right in front of her. But there was also a flashing torchlight in the back. When she turned toward the light, she saw the shadow of her grandfather. But it wasn't just a shadow. It was Mishumas. She rushed into his arms, still confused, but so happy to once more be reunited. For a long time, they just sat in each other's arms. And finally, she asked what had happened. Well, her grandfather began. After the council meeting, they ambushed me and left me for dead upriver. I would have died except for my friend Mukwa came here just in the nick of time. He saved my life. He fed me and he kept me warm. Right here in this cave, all winter long. We hibernated together. On each new moon, I would pray for you as I tried to regain my strength. I was just about to come after you when I sprained my ankle. So when Mukwa saw you today, he told me you were coming to us. He told Muskrat to keep you busy while he planned your return. The next morning, as the three set off upriver, away from the sad village, they looked down over the rushing river. Ziguan smiled when grandfather pointed to the spot where yesterday she'd slept. The bank was now covered with cowslips. Spring had returned, and happiness would cover the land. I share this story with all of you because not just the actual meaning behind the story, but because there was a piece that he left me that I got to find 15 years ago. I remember. And this piece was in his own handwriting. If anyone had got a book from my dad, they knew he'd sign it or leave him a message. So right here, it says, and this is not just for me anymore, it's for us. It's for all of us to remember. It says, To my darling Katie, Sikoni Cuisines. Remember the old ones. Love, Dad. Miigwech. Apche.
We hope you enjoyed this special induction ceremony honoring Walt Bresette. Before we say goodnight, there are a number of individuals and organizations who deserve our thanks and recognition. Wisconsin Conservation Hall of Fame Administrator Ruth Ann Lee did a wonderful job organizing and producing this ceremony. There's a lot that goes on behind the scenes to make this all run smoothly, and she did a great job. Thanks, Ruth Ann. We'd also like to acknowledge the team that brought forth Walt's nomination. Rick Whaley, Red Cliff Tribal Chairs Nicole and Christopher Boyd, Professor Patty Lowe, and the Great Lakes Indian Fish and Wildlife Commission. Additionally, University of Wisconsin Stevens Point for providing technical support, and the Wisconsin Conservation Hall of Fame Board of Directors, Board of Governors, and our voting member organizations. And once again, thanks to our 2024 sponsors. We are now accepting nominations for next year's inductees. The window remains open through May 2024. Learn more at our website, wchf.org. Perhaps make a donation while you're there to ensure that we can continue honoring inductees for many years to come. Thanks for being with us tonight. May we all follow in Walt's footsteps in celebrating and advancing the conservation ethic in the state of Wisconsin.